start. So welcome everyone to the latest edition of the webinar series, Dialogue about Women in Mining, Challenges and Opportunities. International Women in Mining and Embellie Advisory have partnered to offer a series of webinars to discuss personal experiences, corporative strategies, and local leadership that promote gender equality in the mining industry. The purpose of this webinar is to gather geographically diverse speakers and audiences, encourage a multidimensional discussion of gender parity, exchange lessons learned, and share replicable successful case studies. Over the past months, we have hosted 3 editions of this webinar series in Spanish, French, and Portuguese with speakers from Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Canada, Brazil, Madagascar, and others. We are proud to present the 4th edition. This is the English version, and this panel is composed by immensely talented and experienced professionals who will talk about mining in investment on gender relations in mining territories, inclusive development of local stakeholders management, leadership, and women in executive positions, and women's workforce in mining companies at site levels. So joining us today from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania is Mektilder Shambu, who is the Chief Creative Officer at IWiM Webinar. So welcome, Mektilder. We also have Raksha Naidu. She's the Managing Director of Amis Group. She's based in Johannesburg, South Africa. So welcome, Raksha. We are pleased to be joined by John Samuel. He's Group Head of Responsible Business Partnerships at Anglo American. He's connecting from London. Welcome, John. And last but not least is Kristen Mariusa, who is the Vice President of Environment and Social Performance at Lundin Mining, joining us from Toronto today. I will now hand over to Barbara Dischinger. She's the Director of International Women in Mining for some introductory remarks.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to good afternoon or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to today's event. International Women in Mining, in like one sentence, is a leading not-for-profit global organization pursuing gender equality and promoting women's voices, access to opportunities and leadership in mining. And we've been delighted to have partnered with Embellie Advisory. We've been delighted to have partnered with Embellie Advisory since January on this 4-part webinar series. And it was very exciting to work on one in Spanish in January, Portuguese in February, and French in March. Currently, this is our last webinar in the webinar series, and delighted to also have an additional IWiM director on the panel in John Samuel, who's also an IWiM board director. We have actually received interest in a webinar to continue the webinar series in Arabic and Mandarin. So if you know of people who speak these exciting additional languages, do get in touch with us so that we can continue. We have found that this webinar series, doing it in different languages, is a very interesting way to see and hear people from different continents and realize that although there are differences, there often also is a lot of shared experience and similarities. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Maria Jose Rodriguez so that she can continue moderating the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So before we start the conversation, please do let us know in the chat where you're connecting from. So I would like to start with John. So as I said before, John is the Group Head of Responsible Business Partnerships in Anglo American. His main focus is on ethical value chains and thriving community elements of Anglo American Sustainable Mining Plan, including continuing to ramp up their social economic development work, pursuing financing opportunities in the sustainability space, and building on Anglo American's leadership position in responsible mining standards. John engages regularly with investors, customers, unions, and NGOs on responsible mining issues, and is Anglo American's lead representative in the International Council on Mining Metals. John is also a senior associate of the University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership and a trustee of the Anglo American Foundation and Serious Metals Foundation. He's the director of the Development Partner Institute, International Women in Mining, as Barbara said before, and the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. So we know that Anglo American is the third leading mining company worldwide, with 56 sites located in 15 different countries. We also know that Anglo American has a strong sustainability approach that aligns with the SDGs through the implementation of their sustainable mining plan and other management tools. So John, could you please briefly explain about the Anglo American social way and its approach to SDG 5 and SDG 10 that refer to gender equality and reduce inequalities? How this management system for social performance implementation varies from different countries where the company operates, particularly in South Africa, where Anglo American has a significant and long-standing presence. So I hand it over to you, John.
Thank you. Very nice to be here this afternoon. Yeah, so the social way is a system we've been implementing in Anglo American since 2009. So it's got long lineage in the company. We're currently on the third version of the social way, so we update it every few years. And we apply it at all our operations everywhere. So it's actually a pretty consistent approach. It's rooted in good practice around a range of areas, including stakeholder engagement, but I think most notably for this conversation around the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and all that that means for engagement with consideration of and protection for vulnerable groups. And of course, in the mining context, women are sadly very often vulnerable groups, both in communities and indeed in the workforce. So it's got a set of mandatory requirements. As I say, all of our operational assets have to implement it, as do our projects in construction. And we assure against that every year at all of our operations as well. So there's visibility right up to our board sustainability committee. In terms of how we're supporting and trying to work towards gender equality. So firstly, as I say, it's about inclusive stakeholder engagement, and that is a requirement. Clearly, in some societies, there's an attempt to direct stakeholder engagement from companies towards particular groups in the communities, normally men, normally older, etc. But we absolutely mandate that it has to be fully inclusive of all those communities, so women, people with disabilities, minority groups, for example. So that's a requirement. As you would expect, if we're following UN Guiding Principles, we have complaints and grievance procedures, following the good practice there. So looking at things like remedy and redress within that process and trying to make sure that they're fair procedures and that people can submit independently, via third parties or anonymously if they would like, and those all get followed up. And then we also have an anonymous whistleblowing service, which is run for us by a third party, which any Anglo-American stakeholder can use as well. And we require human rights impact assessments at our sites. Normally, not a full human rights impact assessment as you might do for a new project, but an ongoing human rights and health risk assessment. And again, that health assessment may take particular gender lenses on issues. There are obviously issues that impact different genders differently. And then you also asked about the developmental side of things and trying to ensure socioeconomic development in host communities. And again, so both the social way sets requirements for operations to have integrated socioeconomic development strategies, but then we also have, on top of that, we have our sustainable mining plan, which we launched in 2018. And that has 9 stretch goals across the 3 ESG pillars and focusing on social. We call those goals the Thriving Communities goals, and we have goals to support and create 5 jobs off-site for every job on-site at our operations in our host regions. We have goals around supporting host communities to reach the SDG targets for community health, and we have targets for education as well. We want the schools in our host communities to be in the top 20% of the schools in our country of operation by 2030. And all of those programs, they're big programmatic interventions run over many years. All of them have targets up to 2030, which we track and report. Some of those are in our executive incentives. Some of them are part of broader commitments we've made to the external world. And all of those have a gender lens. So we do a review to make sure that all of those interventions both are designed to support equitable participation by everybody, and also that we are actually delivering that. So for example, our enterprise supplier development programs, it's about 40–45% female entrepreneurs that we're supporting at the moment. So we're not quite at parity, but we're not far off. And then similarly with education, we'll look to ensure that, for example, that the girls in the schools are doing as well as the boys, and we'll also look to see if there's particular bits of infrastructure. So in South Africa, one of the things we've had to do, for example, is support improved ablution facilities, because there was nowhere safe and private for girls to attend to their ablutions, and obviously that becomes particular problems as girls get older. So yeah, so it's a whole range of interventions, and we're always testing for gender sensitivity. We do have gender specialists within the company. We get in to come and check what we're doing to make sure that we're appropriately sensitive. Yeah, and hopefully that leads to a much more balanced approach than perhaps we've seen in the past.
Okay, that's very interesting, John. What about implementing the program in different countries? Like, do you have some kind of priorities to focus on according to the jurisdiction that you're working on?
So our standards and targets are actually pretty consistent across the group, you know, and it literally is everything from Australia to Zimbabwe. So we've got a real A to Z of countries and very different contexts, and then obviously very big in Latin America as well. But clearly how we implement in that context does vary. So we always start with you know, proper stakeholder engagement, baseline reviews, trying to understand what the particular issues are. So they will be very different in South Africa and Zimbabwe to what they will be, for example, in Australia, where actually we might be more focused on encouraging more girls to go into STEM subjects, for example, because we know that girls get lots of social pressure not to do that. That's probably not the main topic or main issue for us to address in South Africa, where it's actually more addressing the quality of the schools and working with local government, school leadership teams to actually get the schools overall up to a good standard. And then once we've got into that position, then we should be able to start thinking about, well, are girls and boys making sensible choices? Are they making the most of their potential, for example? Yeah, so they're pretty common standards across the group, but we try and make sure we're implementing in the right context wherever we are, responding to particular local needs. And that's particularly acute in health as well, of course, where the health outcomes vary very, very widely across our host countries.
All right. Well, thank you, John. It's very interesting, the work that you're doing. It's an absolute ongoing relationship as well with local communities that need to be constantly nourished. So
and if anybody's interested in the social way, it's all publicly available online in English, Spanish, and Portuguese as well. So if you go onto the Anglo-American website and search for the social way materials, all of the standards and all of the guidance documents are publicly available.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, John. So talking about the South African context, I am now curious to know about Raksha's experience of becoming a successful mining executive. So Raksha is a Bachelor of Science graduate and an executive professional with over 18 years of experience in all facets of efficient and effective analytical research, mineral processing and production, process optimization, project management, development and implementation of business strategy, leadership, and general management. Raksha's biggest passion is people. Acting as a mentor and a leader, she's getting involved with different charity initiatives, including setting up a non-profit company called the Girlfriends Group. Currently, Raksha is the managing director at Amis Group, and she has a mentorship passion that propelled her to get involved with Women in Mining South Africa, where she currently serves as deputy chairperson. So welcome again, Raksha. So following John's comment on the South African context, I would like to know what's your story behind becoming a successful businesswoman. What challenges have you faced in a traditionally male-dominated industry, and under the cultural context of South Africa, how easy or difficult was it you to access to a STEM educational degree? So on your hands, Raksha, please be my guest.
Sure. Thank you, Maria. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, so when I started my career many years ago, I was one of 3 females that joined a hydrometallurgical processing plant. It was myself, it was a secretary, and it was a cleaner. And it was extremely weird for me, coming from an environment at university where it was a nice mix of men and women. And it was very difficult and quite quite awkward, to be honest, in terms of how I navigated myself through that process, because I just constantly felt uncomfortable. I was very fortunate in that the plant manager at the time he was just very kind, and he sort of took me under his wing and helped me navigate through something that I don't think I was necessarily prepared for, because they don't exactly teach you at university that when you get out of this very safe space and you move into this environment, you might be on your own or there aren't any other women around, so you're out of your complete comfort zone. So it was a lot of a learning experience as I navigated through that process. And the more I worked on the plant, the more I became exposed to the differences in not just gender challenges, but also the cultural challenges, as a lot of the guys on the plant were not Indian, firstly. So it was exposure into very different cultural norms and understandings in terms of how I needed to speak to people and the manner in which the conversations go from a cultural respect and a man and woman communication, because African cultures have very specific traditional means of communication versus how it is with others. So a lot of it kind of worked for me, as in I kind of learned as I went. And I had to make many mistakes, rub people up the wrong way sometimes, take offense myself when I felt I was being disrespected, even if necessarily people were not doing so intentionally. So it was a massive eye-opener into what reality of working in this environment was in my country. One of the things I think that helped me the most throughout the early stages of my career was the role that managers and mentors and sponsors effectively played. And I think that that's something that is so undervalued in climbing that corporate ladder. And if it wasn't for the encouragement of mentors and sponsors, I don't think I would have had as many opportunities as I did have. When I eventually left the production environment and I moved into AMIS, I had already had a very different mindset as the young girl that started at university, because I had learned lots of hard lessons. I had developed a very thick skin. I was very confident in myself now because I worked in this very rough environment, which is, again, predominantly male in every sense of the word. So coming into AMIS, I was almost ready to navigate the next stage of my career. And when I was given the opportunity to become managing director, I was effectively told by the CEO then, here's a pair of flippers and go and swim. And there was no guidance. There was no tools given to me. There was not much support around. And it was very much a sink or swim kind of environment. And I figured, okay, I'm definitely going to take this opportunity and I am going to figure it out as I go. And the first time I sat in a boardroom at executive level around a board table, and again, I was one of two females in the room, the other being the HR executive, I was hit with a whole new form of discrimination, because what existed around the boardroom table was a different sort of gender bias as opposed to what I experienced on the plant scale. People still treated me differently. People still weren't comfortable with me being around that table. My voice was always suppressed. I was challenged every time I raised something. I was called emotional on numerous equations. I was even asked by the CEO at the time if it was that time of the month and why I was so passionate about whatever it is that I was arguing about. And initially it took me aback. To be honest, I never knew how to actually handle it many times. I remember crying in the bathroom, taking a walk around the building, trying to figure out, okay, how do I pull myself together? But I learned by myself in the beginning. I learned that I needed to dig deep into myself to try and find my sense of strength. And I knew what I was there for and why I was there. So I began to challenge the norms. I began to stand up against words of discrimination or derogatory comments or even just negative energy. And it became very difficult to do so on my own. And I went out trying to look for, to try and find women that I could identify with that were in similar positions as I was, to try and gain some sort of insight, guidance, and knowledge and those sorts of things. To be very honest, in the beginning, it was very difficult to find. Sometimes we think that there are a lot more women who are going to be receptive to giving guidance and sharing their experiences. Not everyone is nice and kind, and I learned that the hard way. And I had lots of anti-mentors as well, who actually taught me different lessons that I learned, which were invaluable through the journey. But then as the process continued and as I discovered organizations such as WIMSA and I was exposed to women who were more like-minded and there to support and encourage, it made the process a lot easier. Again, the biggest role came from having mentors and sponsors within my organization that were then able to, guide me through processes, allow me the opportunity to be myself, and allowed me to lead as an authentically unique female. Because we do have different leadership styles, we do things in a different way, but I think it brings a very different perspective to sometimes how men probably look at or interpret different things. So I think the biggest story, I think, or the biggest takeaway I always take is I've always had to work harder than most people. I've always had to put more into everything that I did, because I always felt as if I was, needing to prove a lot more through the process. And I think one of the challenges that experiences in South Africa, and I would assume most of the world, is that we're not necessarily prepared for what the realities are when we leave university or the safety of our schools or our homes or whatever it is, into what the big, bad, ugly world really is like. Nobody prepares you of how you need to handle certain conversations. Nobody prepares you adequately in terms of, this is how people are going to treat you. They're going to treat you differently because of your gender, of your age, of your racial standing, whatever it might be. In my career, I've had Indian men who refuse to take instructions from me because I'm an Indian woman, and because of those sorts of cultural challenges, resigned from their jobs and moved on. I've had white males that I've encountered who have said, what do you know about business, because you're just an Indian scientist, so you shouldn't know much. And it becomes very challenging to overcome those negative connotations, it's very demoralizing and demotivating. But for me, I've just had to always dig deep in myself in order to try and, find how do I overcome those, because I needed to stand up for not just me, but for all of the other women around me who necessarily weren't able to do so. So getting involved in organizations like WIMSA has been so important, because we try and provide those platforms to try and help women actually find some sort of strength and support, and actually offers the guidance that is needed in order for people to find their own voices, to start empowering themselves as well. So that's sort of been some of the biggest challenges I think that I've experienced. I've been rambling on, so I might have forgotten your other question, so forgive me. But the biggest challenges, definitely from a cultural perspective in South Africa, come from the fact that we've got different skin colors, we've got different genders, and we've got different opinions. And I think that people sometimes need to start embracing it, because the world is not necessarily ready for a female perspective. I think that a lot of people try very hard, and it's wonderful to hear, as John has described, what Anglo-American is doing. But I think a lot more companies and organizations need to do and take actual steps forward. I think a big challenge from a STEM perspective in South Africa is exactly what John said, that our education system is not really geared for it. And I think that the level of education at high school level doesn't adequately prepare graduates from school going into university to be ready for the challenges that come with STEM, let alone people actually understanding what STEM is all about. I think, I was very fortunate in the sense that we had a lot more exposure when I was at school to like really good science teachers, really good mathematics teachers. So we got more of an experience into it, but a lot of our schooling system here is not ready for those sorts of things. And kids sometimes get this first dose of reality when they sit in a laboratory, and then it's like a complete reality check in terms of what's actually going on. And then further to that, the graduates coming out of university into the industry are also not necessarily prepared for it, because sometimes what the universities are currently teaching them is too superficial or too base level. So coming into a normal working environment, they're then again hit with further complexities because of what reality offers in terms of how things have to work, how you've got to be a self-starter, the complexity around the fact that what you do in a laboratory space or on a plant or whatever it is has an actual monetary impact down the line that affects the business and impacts it as a whole. So I think there's a lot more awareness that is required. There's a lot more education that is required. And, there are lots of different organizations, WIMSA included, that are trying to bridge some of these gaps, trying to shed more light in terms of what some of these gaps are. WIMSA's one of our projects at the moment is we're trying to embark on a career booklet. And this career booklet is focused specifically on women in mining, on STEM education, and trying to give people an insight in terms of these are the different STEM careers that you can have. This is what you would require in order to get yourself ready for it at school level, at university level, and give people an insight into the day in the life of. Because I think without the information, we aren't able to make the right type of decisions in order to move forward and navigate careers. I don't know if I've answered everything, Maria.
Yeah, pretty much. Thank you so much, Raksha. That was a really interesting input on your side. You have definitely went through many challenges building your career, but it's a good example for young generations as well. So thank you for that. Now we're going to move forward to a different jurisdiction and experience. We're going to Canada with Kristen Mariusa, who is the Vice President on Environment and Social Performance at Lundin Mining. So Kristen holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Management from the Michigan Technological University and is a licensed professional engineer. Kristen has worked as an environmental consultant as well as the Department of Environmental Quality as a senior environmental engineer, where she was a key stakeholder in the development of new mining legislation for the state of Michigan. Kristen was managing director of the Eagle Mine operation, where she has worked since 2010, and she joined the Lundin Mining Group in July 2013 with the acquisition of Eagle Mine from Rio Tinto. Kristen has more than 10 years of experience in the mining industry, with over 20 years in the area of environmental regulation, permitting, and projects. So we know that Lundin Mining has operations in 5 different countries: Chile, Brazil, USA, Portugal, and Sweden. And Lundin promotes responsible mining, and its social component, the company encourages to work under a voluntary mindset to provide sustainable benefits to local communities nearest to its operations. So across different geographies, the Lundin Foundation provides expertise to work with local stakeholders and generate entrepreneurial initiatives and economic diversification strategies. So in the same context as Raksha, Kristen, I would like to ask, how did you start your mining career? What lessons learned did you take from your personal experience? What improvements and advancements do you identify in the mining industry from a female perspective, considering the different operations that you manage? So up to you, Kristen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for having me. This has been really interesting so far. I'm actually from a family of many generations of mining. And so early on, when I was a university student, I worked at a mine. I was a production truck driver. And so that was my first introduction to mining. And I would say early on at that time, my goal as a female, and definitely surrounded by many men, was to just fit in. And so I did what I had to do to just fit in and be one of the guys. After that, I graduated from university, and just like you read it in my bio, is I worked for the state government. I was a senior environmental engineer, mostly working in water resources, but during that time, then I also got involved in writing new mining legislation for the state of Michigan because of a mine coming in. And, during that time, just being in an engineering background, the university I went to was 75% male. And then I went into an industry, water resources, that also was predominantly men. And so then when I left that job after almost 10 years, and I decided to be a mom and stay home. So I stayed home for 3 years with my children. And then Eagle Mine in Michigan was looking for an environmental manager. So I went into the mining industry full time, and again, surrounded by men. And one of the things that I don't think I really realized, just because my whole career and even my schooling was predominantly men, I didn't realize how few women were around. And, while I was at Eagle, I got an opportunity to see some of our other operations. And it really struck me, especially when I was at our operation in Sweden and visiting other mine sites in Sweden, how many women there were. And there was a lot of women, not just in administrative roles, but about women in the operations. And so that's kind of when it really opened my eyes to, wow, we're really male dominated. And that's been my career, and that's what I've been surrounded by. And I'd say throughout that time, one of the things I struggled with as an engineer, whether it be with the state of Michigan or in the mining industry, was having credibility with the people in the room. And so I did get my professional license, and I made sure that was always behind my name, because having that PE behind my name is what gave me credibility. And so that was really important to me. And
I think we lost Kristen for a little bit. In the meantime, We'll just wait.
But not being too forceful. Did you lose me?
We lost you for a second. Could you please go back for like 30 seconds?
Okay, I don't know where I was, but I'll start with going back to what Raksha was saying, is that you really do have to try to figure out how you walk that fine line of using your voice, but not being too forceful so that you don't sound too aggressive. I'm also a very inclusive person, and I like to collaborate, which can, especially with women, come off as being really indecisive. And so I think, and I think women do that to each other, and men do that to women. I think it's just unconscious. That's something that we do. Over the years, I've struggled with that a little bit in my own confidence in being heard, and walking that line of how should I act in this environment so that my voice is heard. I would say that what I started to realize over the years is that my voice matters and it's unique and people need to hear it. And I think that's really important for us. I work with a coach, a leadership coach, and one of the things he always has said to me is, Kristen, you don't serve anyone by playing small. And I think that's really important for us all to remember, is that when we're sitting on a leadership team or when we're sitting in the room and we use our voice, adding to that conversation that represents the broader organization. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, and I still have to pay attention to, because I can still struggle with my confidence at times. So what have I seen over the years I've been in the industry that have changed in mining? I think we're doing some good things where we're seeing small changes where companies are starting to put targets into place. We're starting to put standards into place. We're starting to look at our PPE and say we need gloves, or we need uniforms, or we need all of that. I'm sorry, I need to drink. So I think that we're seeing a lot there. But at the same time, I think there's more to be done. Oftentimes, I think that we're doing some of this, or that companies are doing this because we're expected to, and it's required. And I think where we need to get to is that people really honestly do see the value in diversity in the room. Having those extra voices, having that broader perspective and the different lenses at the table, I think really matter. So we're starting to see small changes. We're starting to see those shifts, but at the same time, and I think because we're starting to see those small shifts, slowly we'll bring more and more women into the industry. But and through that, I think the dialogue will continue, and I think that momentum will start to shift to more and more women being part of the conversation. And I guess I wanted to share just a few of the things that our operations are doing in terms of improving, I guess, and finding more women for the industry. One of the things is that we have a lot of women in administrative roles, and we really struggle with getting women in operations roles. And so, our operation at Candelaria in Chile, they just trained 40 women in the local community for production truck driving, and they'll hold certificates to drive trucks. We have our operation in Sweden, and our operation in the United States is hiring summer students, and they're bringing young girls into the operation as operators. So giving them that experience on the floor instead of just in administrative roles. And so I think that as well is making a difference. I like what Raksha said, and I think, John, you also talked about it, was getting into the schools and teaching girls at a young age about what we're doing. And I think that's important as well. So, I kind of went all over the place trying to answer your questions, but, I think that as women, we do have a voice, and we do need to reach out to other women, and we need to draw them in. And I guess the other thing I wanted to say that I didn't have early on was I didn't have a lot of female leadership. All of the managers I've worked for have been men. I didn't have that mentorship, and someone, or a female role model to look up to. Raksha said this as well. I learned some things that I will never do from the leaders that I had, and I learned a lot of good things at the same time. But yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction, and I think having conversations like this makes a big difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kristen, for your contribution. You're certainly building an interesting career and building strategies that encourage this diversity on the different operations that you manage. So thanks for that. Now we're moving back to Africa. We're going to Tanzania with Mektilder Shombu, who is the graduate of from the University of Dar es Salaam and holds a degree of Bachelor of Commerce and Accounting. She has worked in the Tanzania Women Miners Association, TAWOMA, as Project Delivery Manager and Deputy Secretary General. Currently, Mektilder is the Chief Creative Officer of IWiM Jewels, a pro-woman local prosperous business that she will further explain about. So thank you, Mektilder, for having us today. Just wanted to provide a little bit of context on Tanzania. This is a country that has experienced sustained economic growth over the last 20 years and transitioned from being a low income to a lower middle income status in July 2020. Between 2007 and 2018, the national poverty rate fell from 34 to 26%, and extreme poverty rate dropped from 12 to 8%. So Tanzania has a development vision by 2025 that it aims to achieve a middle income status by enhancing gender equality in its social, economic, and political dimensions. However, gender-based violence remains a serious concern in the country. So recently, the World Bank released 2 reports this year. One is the Tanzania Gender Assessment, and the other one is the Gender-Based Violence Assessment. Both reports conclude that despite policymakers' efforts and national plans of action, there is lack of funding for implementation of some traditional laws need to be reformed urgently, such as the Law of Marriage Act. These studies also explain the 2 key drivers of high rates of gender-based violence, which is social norms that include early marriage and childbirth, lack of economic independence, and education of women. And the second one is low level of women's agency and decision-making power, low earning, age gaps difference between husbands and wives, and being in a polygamous relationship. So under this context, Mektilder, could you please explain what IWiM Jewels is doing and how it aims to address gender-based violence and empower local women miners in your country?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening from East Africa. Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. And thank you for this webinar. Well, indeed, Tanzania has transitioned in the past 20 years in so many ways. However, gender-based violence is still an issue. As you have said, at national level, there are great laws, great policies, great frameworks that have been put in place. But all these have been put in place to bridge the gap of inequality and to treat women and men rightly and to curb the issue of gender-based violence. However, all these laws and all these policies and all these frameworks have been interpreted with the eye and been enforced with the mind in social norms. So we take the social norms, what is on the ground, what has been known, to interpret the perfect laws that have been put in place. So, for instance, the law can be, okay, there has to be equality when men and women come to in mining business. And there are no biased laws when both genders come to mining industry. However, when you go on the ground, you meet a lot of challenges. I joined mining industry when I was 21. That is 9 years ago. But it's funny because the same issues that I was facing back then, they're the same issues women are facing on the ground. Because in some areas, it's taboo for women to go into their mines, even if they own the mines. So you're not supposed to go inside your mine and you own the mine. And if you refuse to go, you go against them and you go in the mines, everyone jumps, everyone, even the male counterparts who are in the workforce, they leave your mine and you're there with no workers, with no one to help you mine. So you stay there with your mine. So there are cases like those, but the issue has been how the norm, how the tradition interpret these things. And you can find when the government is all working, okay, there is a law put in place whereby if you marry, if you found marrying a young girl below 18, or you have taken a girl from school and this person, the girl child has been married, there is a fine, there is a sentence, 30 years sentence. But again, this is the government. But imagine you're in a community, you're in a village, and a relative has gone out there and, let's say, impregnated a young girl. And unfortunately, he's supposed to marry the young girl. Would you report so that the relative is taken to jail for 30 years? So there's a lot of controversy between the law and the norms on the ground. So that's where we are up to. But again, the reality is often the norms are exacerbating the gender-based violence and the inequity that we see on the ground. Last year and early this year, I happened to do a fact-finding survey thanks to Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crimes. So it was just a small fact-finding project where we went to, we sampled two major mining areas in Tanzania, Geita and Shinyanga. That's where most of the gold come from and the diamond in Tanzania come from. So this project really, really opened my eyes to have a glimpse of what really caused GBV and inequality at large, and why is it flourishing in mining areas for that matter? Because we had data that there is GBV, there is inequality in the country, but we didn't have specific data on how these the inequality and GBV is in the mining sector. That's why we had to do the sample space on and fact-finding project on these mining areas. So it was funny because there are many factors. There are very many factors. Unfortunately, there are many forms of gender-based violence in mining areas. But apart from all that, when you sum it up all, it goes to economic gender-based violence. I'll give you an example. Okay, we interviewed one of the women down there, and we were like, do you know if someone just touches you in a manner which is not appropriate, that is forbidden, that is a gender-based violence? They're like, no, how can you say that? It's normal. It's normal. How can you work with men and you say if someone touches you inappropriately, it's something big? And when you tell them, do you know, okay, let's say for rape cases don't just happen. It starts in small actions that you allow. They're like, no, it's normal here. I've been in the mine for 70 years, since when I was 16, and this is normal. And that's when my eyes opened. I was like, there is something bigger than meets the eye. And again, we go back to, we asked, what's the reason? Why is it going on? Why? They were like, if I don't adhere, how will I get my livelihood? I'm the breadwinner for my family. What will I do? So from there, I personally sum it up. It's more of economic gender-based violence. If these women, if these women in mining had proper means to get their livelihood economically, maybe you could have seen a lesser gap in inequality, a lesser gap in gender-based violence, a lesser gap in all those things that we're talking about now. So I ended up summing all those into one category, the major point being economic gender-based violence. And why did I sum it that way is because I graduated in accounting, but I had passion for mining. I couldn't go back to university to start mining another 4 years after my 3 years. So I decided to pack my things. I went up country to the mining area. So I searched where the mining sites. I went in mining areas. Just like that, I was like, I'll go on the ground, I'll learn from them. So they were accommodative when they thought I was I was the university student trying to write a proposal. But later on, when they noticed that I wanted to buy a bit of gold, I wanted to buy a bit of gemstone, that's when things shifted. I was now an enemy. They bring you something which is very different. They tell you this is good. Okay, at one point, I had fed miners in the camp. I bought food, I bought explosives, I bought all those. So they did the mining, they got the gold ore. We went to the crushing site, we crushed everything, and then the gold came out. We were measuring the gold, and the men came. Most of them, they were Maasai, tall, giant, and they're like, no, you're not taking that gold. I was like, but I spent 1 month paying for this, feeding these people, and borrowing money from my family. Why? So that is what I went through in 2013, 2014. But again, this January and last December, found the same thing is still happening to women in mining sites, in mining communities. So to sum it up, it's something that has been going on just because of the social norms. But again, the change has to be done on the grassroots level, because you go up their laws, but enforcement is when there's an issue. The local government have the laws, but you find the issues are happening at the family level. People are covering family members, and these issues are within the family, within the community. If one reports, how would the community look at her? So people just keep quiet and let it go. For my case, it was a bit different because I come from a different region. So there is, you just go and do business in those areas. So it's something like that. However, after discovering that, and after working with Women Miners Association, and then here coming to have Waumijo, we have dedicated to facilitate training, awareness creation for better opportunities for women in mining, because the main source is for better opportunity. These women don't have better opportunity to sell their gemstones. They mine, but they can't take them to town. They sell to the fellow men in the site. They get lower prices. So the cycle keeps on repeating itself just like that. So what we have come about to do was to create awareness concerning available opportunities for women in mining. And at some point we did it. Okay, at some point while we're doing that, we keep on training them or creating awareness to them, like what is GBV, what is inequality, what are those things, just to chip in knowledge bit by bit, bit by bit. But also what we do, we buy women mined gemstones at premium. When we go to a mine, we first buy women mined gemstones. The men will remain back there. We buy their gemstones first. We know, okay, we have exhausted what we want to buy. Then we go to men as surplus. That is to a bit of encouraging them, because I was there once. 9 years ago, I was there. I faced the same thing. I remember buying gemstone at a very high price from the miners, and then come to town, they're like, this is nonsense. You wasted your money. So having passed through that, you try to give more grace to them and help them to push forward. Again, as you create awareness and all that. But again, when we buy this gemstone, we ensure that their labor of love is never forgotten. And this is just to encourage them more and more. If the stone has been bought from Amina, that stone will be faceted, let's say, by Emmanuel. And that stone will be put into an engagement ring, and the engagement ring is bought by Kelvin. Kelvin will get to know where the gemstone came from and the story. In the north, this is Amina. Amina mined your tourmaline, and this tourmaline was faceted by Emmanuel. And Emmanuel and Juliet has designed this, and now you're having it. We are trying to preserve that. At the end of the day, it's just to encourage these women, because some don't even know where the gemstones go, the gold go. They're just there in the middle of the equation. So that's what we have been doing. But also we have been supporting, or we have been creating groups of women in mineral value addition. And we have opened an association. Okay, it's an NGO called Tanzanian Women in Mining, in Mineral Value Addition. This is specifically for mineral value, mineral value chain at large. But there, what we have put our focus into is to finding reliable international markets. Because remember, the challenge was economic gender-based violence. Some sleep with minors because they don't have financial muscles, because they need their gemstones to be bought at a good price. So they do a supplement to get that. So if we find a way of creating an environment that will foster that, we'll be solving the problem in bits. So we have been having that at the NGO, whereby we have a group of women, and what we are focusing right now is to find reliable international market where they can sell their gemstone. And currently, we are facilitating and looking forward for booth sponsorship, whereby 2 represented from the groups. Okay, we have several groups. So in one group, we are looking forward to get booth sponsorship for 2 members to go and take their gemstone that have been faceted here, not raw, and take them to London, Pure London. It was Pure London in July and Vicenzoro in September. So we are still on that process of finding where will we get the booth sponsorship, where will we do, okay, how are we going to get their plane tickets, the visas and all that, just to expose them, to take them out there and open their eyes. You don't have to go through this to be financial, to get financial muscles or to be able to sustain yourself. You can do much better. So that's what we have been doing so far. And this is with one aim, to create awareness and to reduce the magnitude of inequality in mining areas, because I pass through the same, but again, to minimize economic gender-based violence in mining sector and at large. That's what we have been doing. I think I've answered that.
Yes, absolutely. You're doing a terrific job, and I think it's very interesting. We'll go through the process of your project in the second round of questions as well. We're running out of time, so I wanted to continue. Back to John. Thank you, Mektuder, again. So going back to South Africa, we know that in November 2018, the president called gender-based violence a national crisis and issued a call to all South Africans to eradicate violence against women and vulnerable groups in the country. Recently as well, the president called GBV the second pandemic after COVID-19. So, John, in relationship to GBV reality in South Africa, can you please explain how Anglo-American is contributing as a business to address these social issues, and particularly what is living with dignity about?
Okay, yeah, so we, I mean, we first became aware of this in a sort of evidence-based way, when there was some NGO research done at some of the mining operations in South Africa, and particularly at Rustenburg, and it wasn't one of our sites. But the findings were pretty horrific, and we couldn't see a reason why, if it was happening at a neighbouring site, it wasn't happening at ours. And then we also did some staff surveys, and we did find certainly female employees did not have a sense of safety in all our workplaces. So that kicked off a sort of a very broad spectrum of work. So it's included, and I'll be very brief and can follow up with questions, but it's included firstly policies. You know, we've got to updated our gender bullying and harassment policies to make it clear what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. There's been training for leaders, and there's been awareness around the company to try and help people understand what the rules are. And then also we've put in place a lot of resources. So under Living with Dignity, for example, we do have the ability to support people who are the victims of domestic violence, for example. In South Africa, we've created a Living with Dignity hub, which has an ombudsman, and that's an independent place where anybody with a complaint around any sort of sexual gender-based harassment can go and raise that concern outside the normal line management channels, which many people don't feel safe to use for obvious reasons. And then we're also trying to make sure that there's a supportive community environment as well. I mean, this is in our operations principally because it's in the places where we operate. So we're trying to tackle that too. So we're supporting things like women's refuges, but also women's support services around the communities where we operate. And the link with the pandemic was actually quite notable. There was a very big increase in gender-based violence during the pandemic. So we've upped efforts there. And then finally, we try and make sure that these things are mainstreamed into our programs. So for example, in schools, we are planning to start addressing gender roles and teaching both boys and girls, you know, what are acceptable behaviours in the classroom and in life more broadly. And so we're trying to attack it from many angles with many different partners, not something we can do on our own.
That's very interesting, John. Thanks for that. Talking about the South African context again, I would like to go with Raksha again. So Raksha, as a mining woman, how do you see GBV impact the mining sector, and how WIMSA is contributing to tackle these issues and other social issues that women may regularly face in the South African mining culture?
Okay, I'm not an expert in this at all, and you know, I'm probably one of the fortunate people who haven't experienced it myself, but I hear lots of stories all the time. Like John mentioned, you know, there's so many platforms that companies do create, but the reality on the ground is a lot of people are not talking about this. There are lots of people who experience it, and they're just far too scared to step forward and say something, for fear of losing their jobs, for fear of not being taken seriously, or for fear of just being further abused as well. You know, we've had many stories come out from you know, different colleagues or friends, or you know, people that have come forward at WIMSA who tell some very scary things in terms of what actually goes on underground, what happens in dark corners, in cages going underground. You know, the facilities are just not well equipped to accommodate women. And like John had mentioned, you know, in terms of setting up change facilities or ablution facilities specifically for women, you know, those are like almost basics that mining houses and mining companies need to start putting in place, just to start creating even smaller steps forward to making people feel safe. And I think a lot of people have also been told, you know, like almost when they report certain cases, it's been brushed off, or it's been, you know, the situation is recorded, but nothing's done about it. You know, no investigations are done, or, you know, there's just no action, so people don't feel like anything's ever going to happen. And then most times as well, you know, women are faced with that choice of, do I stay and put up with it? Do I leave? But then where do I find other employment? And like Matilda mentioned, you know, a lot of women end up staying and enduring it because they need to put food on the table for their families. And it's just so unfortunate that these environments are just not safe, and also just not safe enough for women to talk about these things. And I think one of the roles that WIMSA plays in this type of scenario is we try and offer a sense of support to people. We try and offer that shoulder for people to come and speak about their situations very freely. Unfortunately, there are only so many things that we can do. We try to direct people to the right channels to try and take things further. But WIMSA has now become actively involved with the Minerals Council in South Africa. We take part in various different other discussions that occur at different organizations. And I think it's a collective voice that needs to be created, and it's a journey that we all need to walk. It's definitely not going to happen overnight, and I think it's a lot of active steps that you know, not just, you know, one mining house needs to take, but many of them need to take before action is actually seen. And the problem with gender-based violence in South Africa particularly is that it's not just a mining issue. It's spread across various industries for a variety of different reasons, and we've just got a far bigger problem than I think most of us know how to handle or how to deal with. So talking about it and you know, trying to empower women to be able to say no or try and advocate for themselves is steps that we all have to take, but we're still a long way away from trying to fix the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Raksha. I had a little connection problem. I don't know if you can all hear me now. But I'll just, yeah, okay. Well, thank you, Raksha, again. I would like to move forward with Christian now, again. I would like to ask Christian, from your personal experience, what cultural aspects, now we've been talking about gender-based violence, economic endeavors that women face daily in the mining industry. What do you consider that affects positively and negatively to develop and enrich a mining career as a woman? How inclusion and diversity, as John mentioned before, play an important role in your work?
Okay, thanks. I seem to be having an internet connection difficulty as well, so hopefully I stay with you. You know, in some of the discussion that I'm listening to, we don't operate in the jurisdictions where we're operating. I think our challenges might be a little different, being in Portugal and Sweden, the US, and then in Latin America. But I think that one of the things we all recognize is that having women or just diversity in general in the industry is important. We see business performance is better. We see that financials are better and overall the business is better. So we know that we need to do it. And as I said earlier, we are making those small changes and working toward that. But one of the cultural things that I've noticed is that we're all starting from a different place. And, you know, John, you said it, like the standards are very similar or the same at all of your operations, yet at the same time, you know, we are starting from a different place, and the targets that we set and the opportunities that we offer are different. So for women moving in to our operations in the United States might be very different than for women in Chile. You know, I think that when you ask, how is it an enriching experience for women in any culture, we're paving the way. You know, there's been women in front of us that have paved the way, thank goodness. And we're still doing that. And, you know, we're trying to change deep cultural perspectives. And that's not an easy thing to do. And it's not going to happen overnight. And I think that having us all here, having conversations like this, and they're very different, our experiences and what we're doing, they all matter, and they're going to move us slowly in the direction that we need to go. You know, and the other question you asked is how do diversity and inclusion play a part in for me, every day it's part of my job, just because I am a woman in the mining industry, and there's women I want to pave the way for, you know, and I think the role that I can play in this space is be an advocate for the younger women professionals. You know, as Barbara said earlier, working as a mentor in the global mentoring program through the International Women in Mining. I'm always looking for opportunities and trying to advocate for women, helping them find their own voice, helping them find their confidence, and to see themselves at the table. And to go back to what I said earlier, is not play small. We're not serving anybody when we play small. And so I think that I try to take that with me every day, and we'll continue on this journey and help make this change.
Okay, thank you, Kristen, for that. I really appreciate your comment on this. Finally, just I wanted to ask Matilda to please briefly tell us, how do you envision WowMe Jewels in 10 years from now? And do you see it as a replicable model for other regions in Tanzania or even other countries? And how do you motivate younger generations through your project? Could you please unmute yourself? We can't hear you. There you go.
Well, WowMe started as an inspiration from the beginning to act as inspiration, and it's a story of a young girl, 21 years old, who ventured into mining and later co-founded WowMe. This was to show an African youth it is possible. One can venture into mining and go out there and do what she dreams or what he dreams. So 10 years from now, WowMe Jewel will be an household name for ethical and traceable gemstone and luxury jewel, first stop in Africa, with stories of love and sweat clearly showcased out there, not hiding anything. But again, with fully equipped state-of-art lapidary and jewel making center dedicated to youth. This is part of our strategy as WowMe for the next 10 years, because when I started, no one held hand. No one said, young lady, don't go this side, don't go that way, you'll fall down there and all that. But now with WowMe, we can do that. We have started doing it with one young boy when he was 16. He dropped out of school and he was 16. We carried him. Now he's 18 and he has just gotten his GIA qualification and he's our international lapidarist. We have another young girl, 22, dropped out of university when things were tough and we trained her. Now she's our card designer. So if we manage to do just a sample space to 2 people in a span of 2 years, It's possible for 100 young ladies. It's possible for 100 young men out there in the country and in Africa at large. So we have a strategy of having full equipped where youth can have all the information, full information on what they can do and what they are, which road they can take in the mining sector. But also, among the strategies that we have and we have been implementing in the past 2 years is having expedition trips at least once per year to international gem and jewelry exhibition for local women and women in mineral value chain. Okay, last year we did once, previous year we did once, and with one lady. And we see the changes even in their business back when they come back home. Now we are working on having 3 expeditions per year and boosting that. If we could do something for one young lady out there, we can do for 1,000 of them. It will not take 1 day, 2 days to see the change we want to see. It might take 2, 3, 4 years, but 10 years down the road, we'll see the change we want to do, we want to see in the society. So far, that's what we've been doing. And so far, it's sustainable and it can be replicated elsewhere. Because again, it's one thing to have women in mind, but if we don't collaborate women and youth, we won't have the next generation. We won't have shared knowledge, or we don't have generation that know what to do. So we believe we have been doing that. We keep on doing that, and we are looking forward to have minds, great minds that will help us do accomplish that. But it's replicable. It's replicable out there.
All right. Thank you, Matilda, for your contribution, and we wish you the best of luck for this interesting endeavor. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. However, I highly appreciate all your contributions to this positive conversation. As concluding remarks, I can say that there are voluntary and effective corporate strategies that enhance gender equality and tackle GBV beyond compliance requirements, building a successful executive career in a culturally challenging environment is feasible, and hopefully it generates a positive snowball effect on younger women. That grassroots initiatives for gender equality and female prosperity are tremendously positive when effectively identifying and addressing deep-rooted social issues. And finally, that gender equality in the mining sector is an ongoing challenge that certainly keeps us all busy, but the current efforts will absolutely offer a brighter path for future generations. I wanted to ask Barbara if she wanted to make some final remarks, but I think that she is not connected. I don't know. Barbara, are you somewhere as an attendee? Otherwise, I don't know if you as panelists and speakers, do you have any last final comment to end this conversation? Otherwise, we'll just finish the call now. No, all good? Well, thank you again, Ron, Raksha, Kristen, and Matilda for joining us today and for sharing your stories. It was a pleasure having a call today with people from South Africa. We're having people from Argentina, from the States, from everywhere. So thank you and stay tuned for our conversation.